South had seceded from the Union and established a confederacy, it was now a sovereign nation. Therefore, the United States of America and the Union had absolutely no authority to pass or to enforce any type of legislation, including the Emancipation Proclamation. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a tremendous victory for the forces of the Civil Rights Movement and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. However, the Voting Rights Act is merely a piece of legislation which has a specified time period after which it must be once again signed by the United States President in order to go into effect. If the President deems it necessary not to sign this particular piece of legislation, it leads us to wonder what measures would have to be activated in order to protect the rights of those United States citizens that the Civil Rights Act was established in the first place to protect. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 set off an entire wave of riots and violence across the United States. From coast to coast, urban centers of the United States went up in flames. This caused the U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson to convene the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, or the Kerner Commission. The job of the Kerner Commission was to determine why the riots were continuing to happen in urban centers of America and to determine if there was any possibility of preventing them. The commission concluded that our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. 40 years later, on the anniversary of the Kerner Commission report of 1968, the dire predictions that were stated in the report were revisited to see if, in fact, they had come to pass. The findings of this 40-year anniversary investigation came to be known as the Millennium Breach. According to the Milton S. Eisenhower Foundation, a group founded to continue the work of the Commission, the Kerner Commission's prophecy had come to pass. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and minorities are suffering disproportionately. Their findings also went on to state that the top 1% of Americans have more wealth than the bottom 90%. The report said that the United States is first in the world among industrialized nations when it comes to wealth inequality. As we continue to evaluate the merits of the claim of America being the Promised Land, let us also direct our attention to Northeast Africa, Israel, and a small group of determined men and women who in 1967, according to biblical prophecy, stated that they were returning to their ancestral homeland. Although they arrived in 1967, their arrival was foretold by the Watchers of Time, centuries and even millennia prior to their arrival. In the 17th century, Sir Isaac Newton, the culminating figure of the scientific revolution, stated, "At about the time of the end of the world, a body of men will be raised up at Jerusalem who will turn their attention to the prophecies and insist upon their literal interpretation in the midst of much clamor and opposition." 300 years later, famed German-born Jewish philosopher Oscar Goldberg stated, "The coming of black people from America to the Holy Land would signify the beginning of the Messianic era." On July 28, 1994, the Congressional Human Rights Caucus of the U.S. House of Representatives staged a congressional briefing entitled "A Miracle in the Desert: The African American Presence in Israel." The Human Rights Caucus focused attention on the accomplishments of the community and stated that the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem had become an integral part of the mosaic which is modern-day Israel. Their contributions in the areas of natural food production and organic agriculture, music, fashion design and manufacturing, holistic healthcare and education were featured not just as accomplishments of the community, but accomplishments for the state of Israel as well. Regional Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot presented an article entitled "The Hebrew Israelite Community is in the Best of Health." The article focused attention on the superb health of the community as well as the interest of the Israeli Foreign Ministry to promote the community as a model to the world of healthy living, as well as a community devoid of modern-day diseases. On September 29, 2006, the official website of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs posted an informational site on the Hebrew Israelite community describing it as a phenomenon in a land full of phenomena. As we consider the balance of all of this information that we have presented as to the experiences of Africans in America prior to 1967 and the overwhelming accomplishments of the Hebrew Israelite community in Israel since 1967, we place the question before intelligent, rational thinking people: where do you believe the promised land is? 40 years. 40 years since Ben-Ami received the vision to return to the Holy Land and establish the prophesied kingdom of Yah on earth. At this point, it is significant to recall the fourfold mission of the Israelites presented earlier as evidence, because it would not have been enough for the Israelites to successfully complete a Back to Africa expedition. On the contrary, theirs had to be a successful return to the laws and instructions of Yah Yahuwah, the creator of the heavens and earth. As testimony of these events, we reference the words of Ben-Ami during the 40th year celebrations. 40 years have passed since the sacred visit by the angel Gabriel. In that span of time, we have not achieved all the things that were promised, but what we have accomplished is definitely no less than a miracle. For we in our blessed generation have re-established ourselves firmly and permanently in our homeland. We have returned from the last prophetic captivity, never to have such an experience again. In addition, we are the generation which has given birth to the first children of the Most High to be born free since the destruction of the temple. That alone should provide sufficient motivation to carry us to eternity. Not only do we possess the minds chosen to nurture the Genesis ideal, but we have also become a beacon of light unto all of the suffering families on this earth. For the words spoken by the prophet, "In thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed," verily are being fulfilled in this blessed generation. As we present our closing remarks and close our case on the great international religious conspiracy, 400 years of slavery, the Exodus, and the establishment of the long-awaited kingdom of Yah on earth, we offer a prophetic timeline of events to refresh our memory and support the truth of our case. The year 70 ACE, Israel ultimately dispersed from the land and Jerusalem devastated by the Roman general Titus. The 16th century represents a point of reference for the activation of the profoundly effective snare called the good ship Jesus. Few may connect this term with slave ships bearing that name, such as the Spanish slave ship of Sir John Hawkins called the Jesus of Lubeck. Even fewer will ever relate that the African prisoners of war, known by the misnomer of slaves, desired to see Jesus was really a soul cry that they wanted to board these ships and go back home to Africa, not into the clouds to meet a European savior. 1863. Once again referencing the Emancipation Proclamation, this is the false or erroneous date many would offer as the ending of chattel slavery in America. In fact, the Emancipation Proclamation merely transferred the African prisoners of war from private ownership and jurisdiction to federal jurisdiction. To this day, true freedom has yet to be realized by those still languishing in America under the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28. 1963, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers his historic "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington. It was during this same season that His Excellency Ben-Ami and his colleagues began to ask questions at the Abeda Cultural Center regarding the fate of African Americans and their ultimate destiny. As a result of the questions asked in 1963 and the answers that were provided, In 1966, Ben-Ami receives the 45-second vision that it is time for the Israelites to return to their ancestral homeland. 1967, the Exodus. More than 300 souls leave America to prepare themselves to contend with the Creator face to face in the jungles of Liberia. March 1968. Dr. King delivers his "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech. Within approximately 1 month of Dr. King's mountaintop speech, the African Hebrew Israelites returned to their ancestral homeland, represented by Prince Keskiahu and His Excellency Ben-Ami, to scout the land and prepare for the great ingathering and the establishment of the long-awaited Kingdom of Yah on earth. February 2005. The inauguration of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Southern Christian Leadership Conference Ben-Ami Institute for a New Humanity. As with many tales spun over the pages of time, this presentation ends right back where it began. In fact, it ends where everything began, Eden, Northeast Africa. You now have before you all of the evidence. Could people of African descent truly be the descendants of the Israelites and the people of the book? Could it really be true that the kingdom of heaven is here on earth and expanding as we speak? Have the prophecies pertaining to the regathering of the ancient Israelites really been fulfilled by the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem? You now have a profound choice to make. Believe it or not.
Promised land. He knew his people would someday be free to roam the heavens across the sea, taking our destiny in our hands against the power of Yah. Who can stand? We won't be beaten. We can't be stopped. He saw us that day, standing on the mountaintop. He went to the mountaintop and looked over on the other side.
Because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land.
He went to the mountaintop and looked over on the other side. I left that world behind and went over to the other side. I needed peace of mind. Yah took away my fears, tenderly wiped my tears. He made me over. Hallelujah, Father, I'm here.
Because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. Because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now. Because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live takes its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will.